And here, I just want to give you a flavor, I guess, of the distribution across regions. So this is not in absolute dollars necessarily, but just in general terms. So not surprisingly, China's at the top of that list, but you can see in relative terms where India, Japan, Singapore, and Australia might fall in terms of edge spending, if you will. Certainly a lot of opportunity. So, I started out with a lot of market data, a lot of very reputable organizations that are talking about edge, and so it seems everyone's talking about edge. Yet, at the same time, nobody seems to know exactly what edge is, right? And so I want to start to dispel, that one misconception, which is that edge is many things. It's important for us to separate the applications for edge, which are many, yet the definition of edge is pretty consistent regardless of application. So those applications that tend to come to mind, 5G, autonomous cars, smart buildings, smart cities, things of that nature, certainly are at the top of most people's lists when they speak of edge. But likewise, an enterprise branch office, a retail back office, a factory, a regional medical facility. These also are edge applications. And so, some of those that I mentioned early on are certainly buzzworthy. But then there's that whole set of applications that are really in the here and now, right? We've got enterprise customers in a lot of vertical segments that are deploying edge solutions. And so edge is this practice of collecting, storing, analyzing, and managing data where it's generated. It's proximate to the end users who benefit from improved application performance, reduced latency, and optimized bandwidth utilization. And so that, in a nutshell, regardless of all of those disparate applications, really holds true. So that's, I guess, the point first and foremost that I want to make with this audience is that that's what edge is. And so I think the more as a community we can be less confused by what edge is and recognize that there are many, many applications, but then there's kind of that one driving force, right? So we're trying to deploy IT assets in a way where we get the benefits of reduced latency, improved application performance, optimized network, and so forth. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of macro trends that we're seeing that are driving edge adoption. And so the first of those is an evolution of the network, and that is we're seeing. Well, we've seen the deployments among the hyperscalers and cloud data centers, massive in nature, really significant build outs. And those have been happening over the last number of years, massive investments there. And those will continue, although, even among the hyperscalers, we're seeing an appreciation for the fact that all of the data can't be in one central location because there are regulatory regimes, there are applications that are sensitive to latency. And there are customers that just aren't comfortable having all of that data in the cloud, right? So we're seeing the hyperscalers partner with colo providers to build out more regionally based and distributed data centers, which by their very nature become a little bit more edge. So the shift in the network architecture is that first macro trend that has an impact for edge, and it's a shift from a centralized network architecture to one that's a bit more distributed, and then realizes those benefits of lower latency and improved application performance. And then the second trend that we see that's certainly related is this shift from a cloud-first IT strategy, which many organizations, including Panduit's own, had employed over the last couple of years. And so the reality is that we're coming out of about a decade of IT departments pushing anything and everything into the cloud. And now we have some real world experience with those deployments. And so we know where cloud delivers on its promises. And then we know where there might be a better place for us to deploy applications based on some of those challenges that I mentioned. And that is latency, sensitivity. Maybe you don't have the right scale to realize the cost savings that the cloud promised. You may have regulatory impacts that exist in healthcare and financial services, for example, where you have to rethink. So we're seeing this shift where organizations are recognizing, yeah, cloud's great, and there are a lot of cloud native services that will absolutely continue to grow and thrive. And so I'm certainly not prognosticating that cloud is going to take a nosedive here, quite the contrary, but rather that organizations are taking a more strategic look at how they deploy applications across these environments. And so they're able to leverage cloud, co-location, and on-premise and so forth. So I kind of want to set that up so that that the audience has an understanding of kind of what some key drivers are here in terms of what's driving Edge to begin with. These next few slides, I'm going to step you through the customer journey a little bit as it applies to Edge. The first one is factors that drive an Edge strategy, right? So if you think about the decision-making process within an organization around Edge, there are some business drivers that are going to cause IT organizations to look at Edge as a solution, right? So what tends to be pretty top of mind for folks as they consider Edge, what's driving them to that consideration is faster transaction times, better application performance. So these are not necessarily said in this way, but these are latency concerns, right? We're having issues with the delay that we might see in other types of environments. So new digital services, massive amounts of data being generated. So again, every bit of data and information doesn't benefit from cloud processing. Yeah, some of it does, but so a factory is a great example of that. So if we're in a factory environment, we're monitoring a line, we're trying to drive efficiencies in our production. The folks that are making those decisions, that are monitoring that equipment, that are measuring the output, they're all there. The data is created there. The data is collected there. So we can analyze and drive decision-making processes right there on site. So some of that data might find its way into the cloud for, looking at trends across multiple facilities and so forth. But that's an example of where we don't have to push everything to the cloud because it may not benefit. And so those select applications where there's kind of a need for immediacy and a benefit to kind of collect that data and use it right there where it's created, that's an Edge application and that's an Edge use case. And therefore we want to deploy network intelligence, compute, and store right there where the data is generated to begin with. So a couple of examples of what might drive a customer to consider Edge to begin with. And then once they take a step down that path, some of the concerns that pop up pretty quickly are data security, physical security, certainly cost of deployment, monitoring, system performance, and so forth. And so the reason that these topics come up is that if you think about what we're doing when we're deploying IT in edge environments, and think back to some of those that I mentioned. So a bank branch, a doctor's office, the back office of a retail store, we lose some control of the environment. So a traditional data center that's on-prem at an enterprise headquarters location, we control absolutely everything about that, right? The room is under lock and key. We know who can get inside those doors and who we want to keep out. We've got raised floors. We're managing cable overhead. We're controlling the temperature, the humidity, the lighting. And as we move into the edge, we start to lose some of that control, right? So we're in environments where we might have to deploy access control on a cabinet because we're not in a room that's under lock and key. We're behind a reception area. We're in a space where not necessarily an IT person is the only person that's going to encounter these systems. And you know, the reality is IT equipment makes people curious, right? There are flashing lights and things going on. And so whether it's a curious passerby or a nefarious character, again, as we move out into the edge, we've got to consider the environment, and from an infrastructure perspective, we have to think about how do we protect that equipment? You know, so whether it's from people or from weather or other conditions, you know, these are some of the concerns that customers have, and certainly those of us who are providing services and infrastructure to those services or to those environments need to be thinking about. And then once we get over the hump of what are the challenges, how are we going to address those challenges? What's the solution going to look like? We very quickly get into you know, what am I looking to accomplish? What's the end game? And for those of you that are in the business of designing and deploying and installing and maintaining IT infrastructure, I think this is some really interesting data because it number one, there's a big opportunity here, right? But as organizations are employing solutions at the edge, they have a need for professional services. So people that can help with the design and deployment and integration, planning in terms of what does that solution need to look like? You know, what kind of space do we need? How are we going to deploy, and how are we going to manage this on an ongoing basis? And so there are a lot of considerations around the environment itself and that need to be taken into account in what we're going to design and deploy. And there's a great need for that kind of expertise in the marketplace. So I think that shows some promise. So I want to talk a little bit about how we solve for some of those challenges that were on those last set of slides in the hearts and minds and honestly just the flat out reality of deploying at the edge. And so with infrastructure, in an ideal world, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take traditional IT features. And when I say traditional IT, think back to that legacy on-prem enterprise data center where, you know, we control everything about the environment. In a lot of cases, we have redundant network connectivity, we have redundant power, we have backup systems and so forth. And we know how to do that in a traditional IT environment. Well, edge environments are new and novel and create a different set of challenges. And so edge environments tend to be remote, geographically distributed, and have low or no IT support. And So in order to design and build and deploy systems that can operate in those environments, we have to take those things into consideration. And the amount of space we have, and then to ensure that we've got a system that is improving latency and optimizing bandwidth consumption for the organization. So those are the outcomes we certainly want to be mindful of. But that's really the roadmap, right? That's kind of the key to how do we take everything we know how to do very well in that traditional environment, and how do we replicate it at the edge, and what are the things that we have to be thinking about as we venture out into the edge. And likewise, that infrastructure needs to deliver on really 4 key promises in my view. And so one of those is consistency. So if you think back to edge solutions being remote, geographically distributed, if you've got a consistent design up front that you can deliver and replicate across sites, you deliver a couple of benefits to the customer. So the first one is you're going to speed deployment, right? So if you're hitting 10, 50, 100 different sites with the same solution, well, being able to build that up, perhaps pre-configure it a little bit, but then also deploy it. If you can deliver that consistency across all of those sites, you're going to speed that process. But then once it's installed, once it goes into production and it's up and running, that consistency has another benefit for ongoing management and maintenance, right? So if that IT organization that's now not directly on site with that edge deployment, but they're managing it from afar, that consistency really helps in terms of troubleshooting and addressing issues, perhaps talking a non-technical person who is on site through something to be able to address an issue. So those are some of the benefits that a consistent solution enables, and we have to think about from an infrastructure perspective. Reliability, right? So this is one where, again, back to my traditional on-prem data center example, if something goes awry in that environment, well, guess what? My technical staff, my support team, they're right there on site, right where those IT assets are. As we move out to the edge, I may be hundreds of kilometers away. I might have to put somebody on a plane. And so the more that we can build reliability in upfront, the point I like to make is, infrastructure is, physical infrastructure specifically, tends to be maybe a little bit overlooked and underappreciated. It makes up a relatively small percentage of the overall IT spend on a deployment, and so naturally that happens a little bit. You don't want to make that 7 or 8 or 10% of your cost drive a high percent of your headaches down the road once you're in production, and that just becomes doubly true in an edge environment. So you want to get the reliability right. You want to get that physical infrastructure right up front, because again, if in an edge environment, when those challenges come, you may not have the people right there to be able to jump on that quickly, and you could have more of a delay. And again, you're impacting your systems, your users, your applications, your productivity, and we all know that those costs can add up very quickly. So security. So again, this is one where we're not under lock and key necessarily, and we may have folks that have intentions that we want to guard against, but again, we may just want to ensure that folks that are not supposed to be accessing the IT infrastructure, don't let their curiosity get away from them and end up causing our organization headaches. So building in a physical security element is certainly important. And then remote management, right? So I think that's an obvious one based on some of these other points that I've already made. But having the ability to remotely monitor and manage everything from what ports are connected and live, to metering power, to understanding temperature, humidity, and conditions that are important for electronics to operate properly. The more that I can enable that remotely, the more effective we're going to be in an edge environment where, again, we're not necessarily directly on site and adjacent to these deployments. So here's where I guess I'll highlight a little bit of where the Panduit portfolio fits into the equation. And so I've made the point around a lot of the challenges that Edge presents from an IT perspective in terms of, a bit of the Wild West, these environments that aren't fully under our control. And so you've got equipment, you've got to find a way to mount it, to protect it, to secure it. And that really starts, it could start with a rack, but it could start with an enclosure. It could be a small 24 RU enclosure like this image presents. But it could also be just a standard data center cabinet. It could be a 4-post rack. So again, we need to engage our customers and talk about their hybrid IT strategies and talk about what they want to accomplish with Edge and why and where we might deploy it. And then we can start to really layer in, how are we going to build it out? So from the physical mounting of equipment, very quickly, we're going to want to consider certainly locking mechanisms, but perhaps access control where we can electronically open and close these cabinets and make that process ubiquitous for the organization, for those that need to have access and so forth. How are we going to bring in power? How are we going to manage that power? How are we going to monitor, having the ability to power cycle a piece of equipment remotely, understand if there's a shift in power draw and so forth, might speak to health of equipment from a remote perspective. So again, the PDU portfolio in Panduit's arsenal certainly helps with these capabilities, and then layering onto that the environmental monitoring and control, and then having the ability to deploy sensors and manage and support those through a software architecture. There's a platform that we refer to as Synapsense that you may have heard of, and so that's a system that could be deployed here. And then intelligent connectivity, right? So we've got panels that we're able to monitor electronically and understand changes in connectivity, what ports are connected and so forth. And so again, whether there are intentional changes or unintended changes, we can kind of understand the change in the environment. So I just want to highlight, I guess, from a physical infrastructure. So whether it's an enclosure or a rack or power or connectivity, these are all solutions within the Panduit portfolio that are appropriate for Edge. So I'm nearing close here, and I want to just hit a couple of points. as we wind down. And that is, again, 5G, autonomous cars, smart buildings, smart cities. Those are things we're hearing about. Those are applications that are seeing deployments. They're evolving. Standards are being considered and so forth. And so the reason that we wanted to make a point today about the edge is closer than you think is that we tend to think of those applications I just mentioned first. But then there's a whole host of additional applications in these vertical segments across, so it's, again, a bank branch, a retail back office, a regional medical facility, a manufacturing environment. These, and I refer to that one honestly as the poster child for edge, right? We're deploying IT so that we can collect, analyze, and drive decision making right where data is collected, and manufacturing is certainly one of those. Warehousing is another. But I just want to highlight for you that there are applications and verticals that are in the here and now that we can address today, and then some of these others that tend to be mentioned first as those evolve and really get going here in the coming months and years. We can be ready for those as well. But I just want to make that point that that there are opportunities that we can get after really very quickly now. And so just to reinforce, and I started out by wanting to address that misconception that edge is many things. And again, I will contend that edge is really one thing, right? It's deploying network compute in store proximate to where data is generated, close to the end user. And that happens across many different applications and environments, but there's still that core central definition of edge that holds across all of those. And so separating what edge is from the myriad of applications for edge is I think an important distinction for us all to make. And then the second one is that edge is not the opposite of cloud. You hear that reference now and again. Edge is a complement to cloud, right? So, you heard me talk about this hybrid IT model, and organizations across many industries and many verticals. And so whether it's a service provider or a cloud provider or an enterprise organization, leveraging different environments that are appropriate, that are really application based. So whether that's cloud, whether that's colo, whether that's at your company headquarters, or whether that's at an enterprise branch office, being able to deploy IT assets in a distributed fashion is really the way that we optimize latency for applications, user experiences with those applications, our cost in terms of network that we buy and consume. Those are all things that we're considering, and edge is a piece of that of that ecosystem. So edge starts with hybrid IT is the point that I like to make, because that's really, as we're considering how we want to deploy IT in a way that optimizes the infrastructure, edge kind of comes out of that on-premise piece as it shifts a little bit. And then again, this is a bit of the Panduit perspective. Infrastructure is critical at the edge, right? And so given edge's nature of being remote, unmanned from an IT perspective, or at least low support from an on-site IT perspective, being geographically distributed, being in these environments where we're less fully controlled and under lock and key that we had seen in traditional IT environments. So these are all challenges that we face in edge deployments, and getting the infrastructure right is really critical. And so we're again, as I mentioned earlier, with the infrastructure, we're translating we're translating these traditional IT capabilities to the edge. So we're right sized for the environment. We're physically protected. We're remotely monitoring and managing. We're delivering consistency across sites along with reliability. And therefore, the infrastructure is foundational. So that concludes my comment.